Welcome to Revenge Report. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more. Let's dive in. I walked into the courtroom, the air thick with the kind of tension that clung to the skin like a cold fog. The polished floors gleamed under the fluorescent lights, but the chill in the air wasn't from the sterile environment, it was from the presence of my family. My name is Serena Maddox. I'm 28 years old, and today was supposed to be the day I finally stood up for myself. But standing there, dressed in my uniform, Medal of Honor clipped proudly to my chest, it felt more like a mockery than a victory. My mother, Evelyn, and my sister, Clara, were seated in the front row. Evelyn's eyes met mine briefly before she turned away, her face an emotionless mask. Clara, seated next to her, didn't even glance up. It was as if I wasn't even there. Just another shadow in the courtroom. I could hear the murmur of the crowd around me, their whispers weaving through the air like 1,000 judgmental hands. But I stood tall, shoulders squared, the weight of my service heavy on me, yet strangely comforting. This was my moment, and I would not let anyone take that from me. I hadn't wanted this. None of this. I'd never asked for their approval, but I had fought in wars, bled for this country, and earned this medal. No one, not even my own blood, could take that from me. As I stood before the judge, ready to take the oath, my mother's voice cut through the hushed silence, sharp as a knife. "You don't deserve that," she said coldly. "Take it off." The courtroom seemed to hold its breath, but I didn't flinch. I kept my gaze steady on the judge, and without saying a word, I reached up, unclipped the Medal of Honor from my chest, and placed it on the table in front of me. The small, gleaming pin shimmered in the dim light. It was a silent act of defiance, a quiet rebellion against the woman who'd spent my life telling me I wasn't good enough. "You don't belong here," Evelyn added, her voice dripping with venom. "This isn't your place." I could feel the anger building in my chest, but I didn't give in to it. I didn't need to defend myself to her. She'd made up her mind years ago, and nothing I said would change it. The silence in the room was deafening. Everyone was watching, waiting for me to crack, waiting for me to lash out. But I wouldn't. I was stronger than that. The truth was, I didn't need them to validate me. I had earned my place, not just here, but in this world. I placed my hands firmly on the table, my eyes meeting the judge's, then glancing back at my family, their cold, unfeeling stares. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to explain. This wasn't their fight anymore. "Let's proceed," I said calmly, my voice steady, though my heart was pounding in my chest. The courtroom fell into an uneasy quiet, the tension hanging heavy in the air. But I knew one thing for sure. This was just the beginning. The moment of truth was coming, and I was ready to face it head on. I didn't belong to them. I never had, and today, I would prove it. The silence after my mother's words felt suffocating. I could almost hear the collective exhale from the audience, the whispers flickering through the air like birds flying just out of reach. The judge called for order, and the noise died down. But my mind was already spiraling, preparing for the next round. My attorney, a stoic woman with sharp features named Denise, had advised me to remain silent. In these kinds of proceedings, the less you say, the better. Let the evidence speak for itself. But this was different. Clara's attorney stood now, a smooth-talking man in a perfectly pressed suit, his smile as slick as his demeanor. He wasn't looking at me directly, but I could feel his gaze crawling over me like a predator. He cleared his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I will now demonstrate that Serena Maddox has used her father's declining health as a means to manipulate her way into controlling the family estate." His voice was smooth, deliberate. He wanted to sell a story, and I was about to be the villain. I clenched my jaw, forcing my body to stay still, to remain calm. They didn't know me. They didn't know what I'd been through. But Clara and her attorney were about to try and make the whole courtroom believe I was some cold, calculating opportunist. A series of photos flashed onto the screen behind him. I recognized them instantly. Pictures of me at my father's bedside in his final days, looking exhausted, my hand on his shoulder, trying to comfort him while he slept. The images were chosen carefully. They were meant to show the fragility of the situation, the vulnerability of my father, and my supposed exploitation of it. The courtroom gasped as the photos continued to cycle through. Me, my father's frail hand in mine, a moment of tenderness distorted into something grotesque. Here we see Miss Maddox at her father's bedside, using his illness as an excuse to secure her position in the family. Clara's attorney continued. Notice the absence of any other family members in these images. Where is Clara? Where is her mother? It seems Ms. Maddox was the only one there, capitalizing on a dying man's weakness to lay claim to the Maddox estate. The room hummed with whispers. I felt my heart race, but I kept my face blank. I wasn't about to react to this nonsense. My attorney Denise gave me a sharp look, signaling me to stay silent. She would handle this, but it didn't make the accusation sting any less. I had cared for my father. No one else had. My mother had stayed hidden in her rooms, and Clara had disappeared into her own life, leaving me to care for a man who had never truly seen me as anything but an afterthought. And now, they were trying to twist it into something ugly, something manipulative. Clara's attorney turned to the judge, his eyes gleaming with the satisfaction of having dropped the bomb. We have evidence that Ms. Maddox's actions were not just out of familial duty, but a calculated move to gain control of the estate, he continued, his voice rising. Her claim to the Maddox fortune hinges on her being the caretaker. But I ask you, where was the family? Where was the support? Her actions were nothing short of exploitative. I felt a pang of frustration. This wasn't the truth. This wasn't how it happened. But I couldn't speak. Not yet. I had to wait. The truth would come, in time. The judge, a weary-looking man with glasses perched on the edge of his nose, glanced over at my attorney before addressing the court. We'll take a short recess, he said, his voice a soft command. Let's give the defense a moment to prepare. As the room began to buzz with movement, I stood, slowly, deliberately, and turned to face Clara. She was sitting behind her lawyer, her eyes cold, her lips set in a thin line. I hadn't spoken to her in months, not since the funeral, not since everything had started to fall apart. It felt like a lifetime ago, but this moment was the culmination of years of pain, of frustration, of being seen as nothing more than a tool to be used when it suited her. Clara didn't meet my gaze. She was too proud, too determined to hold on to the narrative she was trying to sell. She wanted to be seen as the victim. She wanted to paint me as a heartless opportunist. And somehow, everyone in this courtroom had bought into it. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell them all the truth, to show them who I really was, who I had been. But the moment wasn't right. Not yet. Denise walked over to me, her expression tight with concern. Don't let them get to you, she said, her voice low. We'll hit back with the facts. This will turn around. I nodded, but it didn't calm the storm inside me. I wasn't just fighting for the estate. I was fighting for my dignity, for everything I had given up, for the years I had spent taking care of a father who had never really seen me as his daughter. The truth was coming. I could feel it, and when it did, it would shatter their lies. The call came at 3:15 a.m., a sound I'd been dreading for weeks. My father, Colonel Maddox, had suffered another stroke. The doctors said it was time. They didn't expect him to make it through the day. I had just returned from a 6-month deployment, my body battered, my mind worn. But I was his daughter. I had to go. I didn't hesitate. When I arrived at the house in Virginia, everything felt too quiet. The house I grew up in, the place that once felt like home, was now a hollow shell, a house filled with shadows. The only sound was the soft hum of the air conditioning, trying to combat the stifling humidity of an early summer morning. It was like the walls were holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. I walked inside and felt the heaviness of the place press in on me. Everything was exactly how I remembered, frozen in time. My father's favorite armchair sat in the living room, the one that had been his throne for as long as I could remember. His favorite books lined the shelves, gathering dust. The portraits of our family, all smiles and good times, stared back at me, mocking me in the silence. I walked through the house with a sinking feeling in my stomach. I found him in that chair, as expected. My father, once tall and imposing, was now a shadow of the man he'd been. His eyes were closed, his breathing shallow. The skin on his face had lost its color, and his hair had thinned to a fragile silver. I sat down beside him, my hand resting gently on his, and just watched him for a long time. In that moment, I realized that despite everything, despite the years of emotional distance, despite the resentments, despite everything he'd put me through, I was still here. I wasn't going to leave him alone. He didn't speak, but I could feel the weight of all our unspoken words between us. The times he'd been distant, the way he'd always preferred Clara over me, the way he never quite acknowledged my achievements, my service. He never said the words I needed to hear. But now, in his silence, I found something I hadn't expected. Tenderness, a fragility I'd never seen in him before. I was there for every small moment, administering his medication, helping him get to the bathroom, even though he resented every step of the process. I did everything I could, even when he couldn't recognize my efforts. The days blurred together, each one harder than the last. I would stay by his side, helping him with small tasks, holding him up when he wavered. But each time I looked at him, I saw the man who had never truly seen me, never truly understood the depths of the pain he had caused. And yet, when Clara finally showed up after nearly a week of silence, I watched her swoop in like she was the hero. She arrived with the quiet concern of someone who had been too busy to care, only to drop everything when it became clear there was something to inherit. She sat beside him, her hand resting delicately on his, as if trying to claim her place in his final moments. She never helped. She didn't lift a finger when I needed her. But there she was, pretending to care when the financial decisions started to matter. I was invisible to her, always had been. One morning, as I was about to leave to get a bit of fresh air, Clara spoke to me for the first time in days. Her voice was soft, almost casual, as if the weeks of her absence were nothing more than a bad dream. "You know, you really don't need to keep doing this. You've done enough," she said, barely looking at me. "I can take over from here." I paused, my hand on the door. The weight of her words hit me harder than I expected. Enough? I had been doing everything, everything for days, for weeks, and now she was telling me I had done enough? I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. She was never really there, and now she was trying to take control, the same way she had always done, hovering just outside my reach, always waiting for me to take the lead, only to swoop in and take credit when the time came. But I wasn't going to let her have this. Not this time. I looked at her, then at my father, and walked out. I needed space to breathe, space to process the anger that had started to churn in my stomach. She had no idea what it was like, how hard it was to keep giving when there was nothing left for you. I needed to walk, to think. As I stepped outside, the oppressive heat hit me like a wall, and I closed my eyes, trying to ground myself. The breeze barely moved, and the heavy air clung to my skin. I tried to remind myself why I was doing this, why I was back here, but the truth was, I didn't know anymore. I'd hoped that caring for him would somehow heal the old wounds, that it would give me some peace. But all it did was remind me how much I had sacrificed. And for what? When I came back, Clara was gone. She had slipped out without a word. I knew exactly what she was doing. She was working the angles, making sure her piece of the inheritance was safe. And I stayed. I stayed because, no matter how much it hurt, I couldn't abandon him. As the days went by, the silence between my father and me grew louder. But in the quiet, there was something else. There was a flicker of something real. And for the first time in my life, I wondered if I was ever going to get the closure I needed. If this was enough, I knew it wouldn't be. But I wasn't leaving, not yet. It was a week after my father passed, and the world felt different, like it had been turned on its axis, and no one could quite figure out how to stand anymore. The funeral had come and gone in a haze, a blur of fake sympathy and awkward handshakes. The family tried their best to mourn, but there was something hollow about it all, like no one knew how to grieve properly. For days, I had stayed in the house I once called home, taking care of the details, trying to make sense of what had just happened. My father was gone, and now there was just this. Clara had returned to her life after the funeral, her role as the dutiful daughter fulfilled for the time being. She'd swooped in for the will reading, eager to get her cut, and I had been there too, watching from the sidelines as the lawyer rattled off my father's last wishes. In a way, I had expected it, but nothing could have prepared me for the bombshell that came next. The moment the lawyer finished, Clara turned to me with that same cold, calculating look she always had when she was playing her part in the family game. "You're not getting the house," she said, her voice smooth, as though it was just another business transaction. I stared at her, unable to process the words. "What do you mean I'm not getting the house?" I asked, my voice coming out more hoarse than I intended. My father had worked his entire life to build that house. It had been his pride, his legacy, and now Clara was trying to take it from me? She smiled that smile I had come to loathe, the one that said, "I know something you don't. You really think Dad left everything to you, don't you?" Clara's eyes flickered with something like triumph. "He may have let you handle things when he was sick, but when it came to the estate, he made it clear where his loyalties lay." The words hit me like a slap in the face. I had spent the last few weeks pouring myself into caring for him, never asking for anything in return. And now this betrayal. I could feel my chest tighten, my breath becoming shallow. You've been planning this all along, I said quietly, though the anger simmered beneath the surface. While I was taking care of him, you were waiting for him to die so you could swoop in and claim everything. She didn't deny it. Instead, she leaned back in her chair, her gaze never leaving mine. It wasn't personal, she said, as though that made it any better. You had your time, but now it's my turn. I had always known Clara was selfish, but this was something else entirely. This was cold, calculated greed. She wasn't interested in preserving my father's legacy. She didn't care about family. She only cared about herself. I stood up, unable to stay seated any longer. You're lying, I said, my voice trembling. You're lying, and you know it. The lawyer, who had been sitting silently in the background, cleared his throat. Actually, Ms. Maddox, he interjected, his tone apologetic, the will is very clear. The majority of the estate has been left to Clara. There's a clause that stipulates— Clara? I repeated, my voice a mix of disbelief and fury. He left everything to Clara after all these years? The lawyer nodded, his eyes carefully avoiding mine. The house, the bank accounts, everything of value, all to Clara. I felt like the ground had shifted beneath me. My vision blurred, and I had to steady myself against the back of the chair. For a moment, I thought I might collapse. But then, I felt something else. Something I hadn't expected. Rage. I had sacrificed so much. I had given everything I had physically and emotionally to care for my father. And for what? So Clara could swoop in, just like always, and take what she thought was hers. I turned on my heel, walking out of the room without another word. I couldn't stay there any longer. I couldn't look at Clara's face and pretend like everything was fine. I needed air. I needed space to think. I stepped outside, the cool evening air hitting my face like a slap. But it didn't help. The anger burned through me, sharp and unforgiving. I had worked so hard to prove myself, to show everyone that I was worthy. But nothing I did ever seemed to be enough. I found myself walking, aimlessly at first, but then with purpose. My father had trusted me. He had always believed in me, even if it didn't always feel that way. But in his final moments, he had betrayed me. He had sided with Clara, the daughter who had never given a damn about him, the daughter who had only seen him as a means to an end. I reached the small park near the edge of town, the one my father used to take me to when I was a child. It felt like the only place where I could still hear the echoes of him. The bench by the fountain was empty, just like it had always been, and I sat down, my hands clenched into fists. This was it. This was the moment. I didn't need Clara's approval. I didn't need my father's legacy to validate me. I had earned everything I had fought for. I had fought for my country, and I had fought for a family that had never fought for me. But I wasn't going to let them control me anymore. I wasn't going to let Clara manipulate me. I wasn't going to let this betrayal be the end of my story. The truth would come, and when it did, they would see who I really was. The courtroom was stuffy, the air thick with anticipation as the next piece of evidence was presented. I sat in my chair, back straight, eyes fixed ahead, though my mind was elsewhere. It had been a few weeks since the will reading, since the betrayal, and each day felt like a battle for my own sense of identity. But this trial, this moment, was a chance to take control, to expose the truth, and I wasn't going to let Clara or her attorney manipulate it into something it wasn't. The door opened and a video began to play on the large screen. My heart skipped in my chest. I recognized the footage immediately. It was a video of me and my father. The room fell into an eerie quiet as the video played. It was an old recording, one I had forgotten about, but Clara and her attorney clearly hadn't. It showed me in the hospital room with my father, his frail body lying in the bed. I was speaking to him softly, holding his hand, telling him I was going to be okay, that I would always be here. There was a tenderness in my voice that I hadn't known I was capable of at the time, but watching it now, I could see the exhaustion, the years of pain, the quiet suffering that had led to this moment. The video cut abruptly to a new scene, one I hadn't seen before. It was me, again, sitting by my father's bed. But this time, I was speaking with him in private. The camera angle made it look like I was whispering to him, conspiring with him. You know, you should really make sure everything goes to Clara, I said in the video, my voice low and almost conspiratorial. She's been so loyal. She's the one who will take care of everything after you're gone. The camera zoomed in on my face, and my words echoed through the courtroom. The faces around me were all turned toward me, judging me. It was a lie. It was a manipulation. Clara's face was the most striking, her smirk of satisfaction almost nauseating. I didn't say that. I hadn't said that. I turned toward my attorney, Denise, but she remained silent, her face unreadable. The silence in the courtroom was almost deafening as the video played on. Clara's attorney stood, raising his hands in mock surprise. "You see, Your Honor? This video clearly shows the defendant, Serena Maddox, attempting to manipulate her father into leaving her the family estate. It's clear from the footage that she took advantage of his fragile state to secure her position." I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. The words kept repeating in my head. This isn't me. This isn't how it happened. But in the back of my mind, I knew how it looked. The footage, the context, it was damning. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to stay composed, to not let this lie take root. It didn't matter that I'd been there for him every day, that I had sacrificed so much of myself. The one moment they found, the one piece of footage, was enough to paint me as the villain in this story. The video clicked off, and the courtroom was left in uncomfortable silence. The judge leaned forward, his hands clasped in front of him, his gaze never leaving me. The air was thick with the weight of everyone's assumptions. "Ms. Maddox," he said, his voice low, "I'm afraid this footage raises significant concerns. You have the right to respond, but the evidence against you is troubling." I didn't know how to respond. My thoughts were jumbled, my mind racing. This was Clara's plan. This was how she'd been setting me up all along. She knew how to play the game, how to manipulate the system, how to twist everything to make it look like I was the one who had used my father's declining health for my own gain. I stood up slowly, my hands gripping the edge of the table to steady myself. I had to fight this. I had to clear my name. "Your Honor," I said, my voice shaky at first, but I forced it to steady. "That video doesn't tell the full story. Yes, I was with my father, but I never asked him to leave me anything. I never manipulated him into giving me control. The truth is, I spent every day by his side, caring for him, watching him decline while Clara and my mother were absent. This is nothing more than a distortion of the truth." The courtroom shifted slightly, the tension in the air thickening. I could feel their eyes on me, but I kept my focus on the judge. The only thing I ever asked my father for was for him to see me, to finally recognize that I had always been there for him, even when no one else was. I never asked for his money, for his estate. I asked for nothing but his acknowledgement. I paused, taking a deep breath. I never manipulated him. Clara is using this footage to play the victim, but the truth is, she's the one who abandoned him. She's the one who only showed up when there was something to gain. I glanced over at Clara, who was sitting there, her hands folded in front of her, her eyes cold. She didn't meet my gaze. I continued, my voice growing stronger. "The only reason I'm here, in this courtroom, is because of my loyalty to him, to my family. And yet, I'm the one being accused of exploiting him." There was a long pause before the judge spoke again, his voice measured, almost resigned. "We will adjourn for the day. I want to take some time to review this new evidence. Ms. Maddox, we will reconvene tomorrow." I nodded, my throat tight. I wasn't done. Not yet. This was just one battle in a much larger war. I would fight back. I would expose the truth. And I would make sure that Clara couldn't manipulate her way into everything that wasn't rightfully hers. The next day in court, the air was different. The tension from the previous session had settled, but it was still thick, like the atmosphere before a storm. My lawyer, Denise, had told me to stay focused, that today would be crucial. But all I could feel was a hollow sense of urgency that had been building inside me since I walked through the courtroom doors. Clara's attorney had come prepared. He'd found a piece of footage, twisted it into something it wasn't, and used it to paint me as a manipulative opportunist. The truth had been buried under layers of lies, and today I had to do whatever it took to unearth it. The judge, a tired man who looked like he'd been through more than his fair share of these kinds of trials, called the court to order. "We'll begin with the defense's next witness, General Lynwood, if you would." I sat up straighter in my chair, my pulse quickening. General Lynwood. The name brought back memories, vivid ones, memories of combat, of leadership, of moments when I had to make impossible decisions under fire. He was the one who had signed off on my Medal of Honor. He was the one who knew me better than anyone. If there was anyone who could speak to my integrity, it was him. I had called him to the stand. He was a man of few words, but when he spoke, People listened. The room went silent as the door opened, and General Linwood stepped in. He was just as I remembered him. Tall, his uniform sharp and immaculate, his posture straight, as if the weight of every decision he'd ever made still rested on his shoulders. His presence was commanding, but there was something about him that exuded a quiet strength, the kind you only found in men who had seen things the rest of the world never would. He took the stand, his eyes scanning the room before resting on me. I gave him a brief nod, trying to convey my gratitude without words. He returned the nod before turning his attention to the judge. "General Linwood," the judge said, his voice respectful but businesslike, "please state your name and rank for the record." "General Thomas Linwood, United States Army, retired," Linwood replied, his voice deep and steady. "General, I understand you are here today to testify about your experiences with Miss Maddox during her time in service. Could you please describe her role and what you know about her character?" The general straightened in his seat, and for a moment, I swore the entire room held its breath. He wasn't just a witness. To me, he was a reminder of who I was, of everything I'd fought for. If anyone could tell the truth about my service, it was him. "Serena Maddox," he began, his voice cutting through the courtroom with authority, "was one of the finest soldiers I had the honor of leading. I've seen many in my time, and few have the kind of grit, determination, and loyalty she displayed." I felt a surge of pride, but I didn't let it show. The room was listening, and now I had a chance to prove who I really was. My heart pounded in my chest. "Tell the court about her actions during her deployment," the judge asked. Linwood's gaze never wavered. He glanced briefly at me, then continued. "Serena was a key member of my unit. We were in the thick of it. Dangerous territory, high stakes. She demonstrated extraordinary courage during a particular operation where our team was ambushed. We lost several good men that day, but because of Serena's quick thinking and composure under fire, we managed to extract the wounded and hold our ground long enough to complete the mission." A few of the jurors shifted in their seats, clearly moved. I could see Clara's attorney scribbling notes, but I wasn't worried about him anymore. I wasn't worried about anyone except the truth. She's the type of soldier who doesn't hesitate. When the situation is dire, she does what's necessary. I've seen her take on tasks that others wouldn't dream of, and she did it with no concern for her own safety. She never asked for praise or recognition. She did what was right, always. The courtroom was silent now, the impact of his words settling over everyone. I could feel the doubt slowly beginning to shift. I could see the moment when they started to question the narrative Clara and her lawyer had built. "General," the judge interrupted, his voice cutting through the quiet, "can you speak to Miss Maddox's character? There have been accusations that she's manipulative, that she's taken advantage of her father's health to secure her inheritance. Do you believe there's any truth to those claims?" The question felt like a punch to the gut, but I didn't flinch. I couldn't afford to. Linwood's gaze never left the judge, his expression calm but resolute. "I've known Serena for a long time, and I've never seen anything manipulative in her. She's straightforward, honorable, and selfless. If anyone knows how to fight for something that matters, it's her." His voice grew firmer, like the weight of his words was carrying the full truth. Anyone who knows her, who has worked with her in the field, would never make such accusations. I could feel the courtroom shift in that moment. The air felt lighter, like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. For the first time since the trial had begun, I allowed myself to breathe, just a little. Clara's attorney stood, preparing to cross-examine. But as he did, I noticed something in his eyes: doubt, uncertainty. For the first time, I could see that my case wasn't as fragile as he'd hoped. The cross-examination was brief. Clara's attorney tried to poke holes in Linwood's testimony, but the general was a seasoned leader. Every question he answered only solidified his earlier statements. There was no doubt. The truth was coming through, loud and clear. After the questioning ended, the judge turned to me. His eyes held a mix of sympathy and respect. "Miss Maddox," he said, "I believe this testimony has given us much to consider. We'll reconvene tomorrow to continue. For now, I suggest you take a moment to reflect on what we've heard." I nodded, standing from my seat, feeling a sense of clarity I hadn't had in days. For the first time since this all began, I felt like the truth was on my side. As the courtroom began to empty, Linwood walked over to me. His expression was the same as always, stoic, but there was something else in his eyes now, a quiet pride maybe. "You did well, Serena," he said, his voice low. "This isn't over, but you've earned the respect of this room. You just have to keep fighting." I nodded, a small, relieved smile tugging at my lips. I will. I've fought this hard for a reason. And for the first time, I truly believed it. The truth would win. I wasn't just fighting for the estate, I was fighting for the honor and respect I had earned, for the family that had never recognized me, and for myself. The tension in the courtroom was palpable as the second day of testimony began. It was clear that Clara and her lawyer were growing more desperate, their carefully constructed narrative beginning to unravel. But I knew this fight wasn't over. Not yet, and I wasn't about to let them win. Today, I had a card to play, a secret weapon that I hadn't shared with anyone until now. It was time to expose Clara's final betrayal. I couldn't wait any longer. The truth needed to come to light. The judge called the court to order, and the room quieted. Clara sat across from me, her usual smugness replaced by something that looked like worry. She could feel it too, the shift, the looming revelation that would completely undo everything she had worked so hard to fabricate. "Miss Maddox," the judge began, his voice calm, but with an edge of curiosity. "I understand you have a final piece of evidence to present. Would you like to proceed?" I stood up slowly, my heart beating louder in my chest than I cared to admit. I had come this far, and I wasn't about to let Clara's lies define me any longer. With a steady breath, I turned to my attorney, Denise, who nodded in encouragement. This was my moment. "Your Honor," I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me, "I would like to present a piece of evidence that will put all of this to rest once and for all. A final, undeniable truth about my father's intentions." I reached into the briefcase at my side, pulling out a small USB drive. The courtroom fell into a thick silence as I handed it over to the court clerk, who passed it to the judge. The judge inserted the drive into the computer, and the screen flickered to life, showing a video. "Is this footage authentic?" the judge asked, glancing at me before addressing the room. "It is, Your Honor," I replied, my voice clear. "This was a video I discovered after my father's death. It is a final message from him, one that he left for me, though I didn't find it until after everything had already begun to fall apart." The video began to play. It was grainy, the quality not great, but the face on the screen was unmistakable. My father, Colonel Maddox, sitting in his study, his back against the leather chair. He looked tired, older than I remembered, but there was still a sense of strength about him. His voice was low, but it carried with it an unmistakable sense of finality. "Serena," he began, speaking directly into the camera, "if you're watching this, then I've already passed on. I'm sorry. I know I didn't always show it, but I was proud of you. You were always there when no one else was. You fought for me when I couldn't fight for myself, and you carried the weight of things no child should ever have to carry. But now, I need to ask you to let go of the anger. Let go of the pain." My throat tightened as I watched him speak, his words cutting through me like a blade. I hadn't expected this, hadn't expected him to speak to me so directly. For a moment, I couldn't breathe, couldn't hear anything but his voice. "I know I've made mistakes," he continued, his face softening. "I've never been the father you deserved, but I've always seen you, and I've always been proud of you. You'll understand why I'm doing this soon. I trust you to do the right thing." The video cut off suddenly, leaving the room in stunned silence. I stood there, my hands gripping the edge of the table, waiting for the murmurs to die down. The impact of my father's words hung in the air like smoke. Clara, sitting across from me, had gone deathly pale. I turned to the judge, who was looking at me with a mix of surprise and disbelief. "That was my father's final message," I said quietly, my voice breaking only slightly. "He left me the estate, not Clara. Me." Clara's lawyer stood up quickly, his face a mix of frustration and disbelief. "Objection, Your Honor. This video is inadmissible. It's hearsay, and it's completely irrelevant to the matter at hand." The judge held up a hand to silence him. "I'll allow the evidence, Mr. Matthews. It's clear that this video was left intentionally, and it speaks to the intentions of the deceased. The court will review it thoroughly, but for now, we'll proceed." Clara was still frozen, her eyes wide as she stared at the screen. I had never seen her look so vulnerable. She hadn't expected this. None of them had. And it was only a matter of time before the truth became undeniable. I could see the cracks in her facade, the way her fingers tightened into fists on the table. This was it. The moment when everything she had fought for began to crumble. She had manipulated the situation, used our father's illness, and tried to take control of everything that wasn't hers. And now, she was exposed. The judge turned to me, his expression serious. "Ms. Maddox, this video is compelling evidence. It seems clear that your father intended for you to inherit the estate, as you've stated. However, there are legal proceedings that must be followed to ensure that his wishes are carried out properly. We will need to review everything, but I can assure you that your claim has been strengthened. I nodded, unable to keep the relief from flooding my chest. This was the breakthrough I needed. I had fought for this. I had fought for the truth, and now it was finally coming to light. Clara's attorney was shaking his head as if trying to process the overwhelming evidence. "This is preposterous," he muttered, pacing at the front of the courtroom. "This isn't fair. You've manipulated the situation. You've set us up. Enough," the judge interrupted, his voice firm. "The evidence speaks for itself. We will reconvene tomorrow to finalize the proceedings. I suggest we all take a moment to reflect on the facts at hand." As the judge stood and called for recess, I couldn't help but feel the weight of everything that had happened. The fight wasn't over yet, but for the first time in months, I felt like I had won a battle. I looked over at Clara, her face twisted in disbelief. The smirk I had seen so many times before was gone, replaced by something I didn't recognize. Maybe it was fear, maybe it was guilt. Either way, I knew I was close to reclaiming my life, my father's legacy, and my dignity. The truth was finally winning. The sun was just beginning to set as I stepped out of the courthouse, the weight of the trial still hanging in the air. But today, for the first time in a long while, the weight felt lighter. The truth had been exposed, and Clara's lies had been torn apart piece by piece. The legal battle wasn't over yet, but I could feel the shift, like the ground had finally stopped trembling beneath me. I stood at the top of the courthouse steps, my hands tucked into the pockets of my jacket, staring out at the street below. The world seemed quiet, almost as if it were waiting, holding its breath for something that hadn't come yet. The crowd that had gathered earlier had already dispersed, leaving behind the echo of their murmurs and the distant hum of city traffic. General Lynwood's testimony had been a turning point. His words had made it clear that I wasn't the villain Clara had tried to paint me as. I had done the right thing. I had fought for my father, for my family, and now I was fighting for my future. But none of that mattered to Clara. She had wanted everything that wasn't hers, and had tried to destroy anyone who stood in her way, but I had stood firm, and I had won. I took a deep breath, allowing the cool air to fill my lungs. There was a sense of peace in the stillness, in the absence of the courtroom's tension. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could finally let go of the anger that had burned inside me. "Serena." I turned at the sound of my name, surprised to see General Lynwood walking toward me. His face was solemn, but there was a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. His presence had been a steadying force in the chaos of the trial, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude toward him. "You did good in there," he said, his voice low and gravelly, but full of respect. "You held your ground. That's what matters." I smiled faintly, my shoulders relaxing. "It doesn't feel like much of a victory yet," I replied, my gaze drifting back to the courthouse steps. "There's still more to come, more legal battles. But I think I'm finally starting to believe it might actually end in my favor." He nodded, understanding. "The hard part's over," he said. "You've got the truth on your side now, and that's something no one can take away from you." We stood in silence for a moment, watching the city bustle around us. The traffic was steady, the sounds of footsteps and conversations fading into the background. It was a fleeting moment of quiet before everything resumed, before life picked back up again. "So, what now?" I asked, turning back to face him. "What happens next? Do I just wait for them to try to throw more dirt at me?" He shook his head, his expression softening. "No more throwing dirt," he said firmly. "You've done what you needed to do. Now it's time for you to decide what comes next." His words lingered in the air, like the quiet before a storm. I had always been a fighter. I had always been someone who fought for others, even when it meant sacrificing my own happiness. But standing here, looking at the calmness of the evening sky, I realized something. It was time to fight for myself, to reclaim what was mine, not just the inheritance, but my own sense of peace and identity. "You're right," I said softly. "It's time to move forward. No more looking back, no more worrying about the past." Linwood gave a small, approving nod. "Exactly. Take it one step at a time. The road ahead won't be easy, but it will be yours to walk. And there's nothing more powerful than owning that." I smiled, a genuine sense of relief washing over me. "Thank you, General, for everything." He gave a small nod, tipping his hat to me. "No need for thanks. You've got what you need. Just remember, Truth and honor are always the best weapons. I watched him walk away, his figure disappearing into the crowd, and I stood there for a moment, allowing the weight of his words to sink in. It felt like everything had changed, not just in the courtroom, but in me. For so long, I had been weighed down by the expectations of others, by the need to prove myself, to live up to their standards of what I should be. But now, as I stood there in the fading light of the day, I realized something important. I didn't need anyone's approval anymore. I had the truth on my side, and that was all I needed. As I turned to leave, a thought crossed my mind. This was the beginning of something new. It wasn't just about the estate or the betrayal or even my family, it was about me, about reclaiming my life, my strength, and my future. I walked away from the courthouse steps, each step lighter than the last, knowing that whatever came next, I was ready for it. And no one could ever take that from me. Weeks had passed since the trial had ended, since the judge had ruled in my favor. Clara had attempted to appeal, of course, but each challenge only served to solidify my position. The legal battle, though grueling, was finally over. I had won, but winning didn't feel like the triumph I had expected. In the months that followed, I was left with a sense of quiet solitude that I hadn't anticipated. It was as if everything had shifted, and now I was forced to face the truth of what I had been fighting for all along. The estate was mine. My father's legacy was now in my hands. But as I walked through the vast, empty halls of the Maddox estate, I couldn't help but feel the weight of it. The emptiness of a place that had been built with years of hard work, but with little love to show for it. My parents had never been truly present, and now, even my father's passing felt hollow. The things that mattered most, family, love, recognition, were missing from these walls. It was time for me to make this place my own, not just as the rightful heir, but as the woman who had earned her place. I walked through the house, each room a reminder of the life I had tried so hard to escape. The walls were lined with old portraits of my family, their faces frozen in time, their eyes cold and unfeeling. I had spent years trying to fit into their world, trying to prove myself to people who had never truly seen me. But now, I was no longer bound by their expectations. The house that once symbolized everything I had tried and failed to be was now mine to shape, mine to rebuild. As I stepped into the study, the room where my father had spent countless hours, my eyes fell on the bookshelves. The leather-bound volumes, some worn from use, some unopened for years, seemed to mock me. I had spent so much time trying to impress him, trying to show him that I could be more than just his second-best daughter. But he never acknowledged my efforts, never gave me the validation I had so desperately sought. I moved to the desk, where papers were strewn across the surface, a mess of unfinished business. I began sorting through them, one by one, picking up the pieces of my father's life that still lingered in this house. The papers, the contracts, the financial statements, they were all part of the legacy I had inherited, but they no longer held any power over me. I wasn't here to carry on my father's business or to uphold his reputation. I was here to build something new, something that would be mine, something that didn't require anyone's approval. I spent the rest of the day going through the house, cleaning, organizing, and throwing away the remnants of a past that no longer served me. The rooms were quiet, the only sound the soft shuffle of my feet on the hardwood floors. It felt strangely liberating, the act of shedding the weight of my family's expectations. For the first time, I was creating a space that was mine. Later, as the sun began to set, I found myself standing outside, looking out over the sprawling grounds of the estate. The gardens were overgrown, the paths worn with time. It felt like the house itself was waiting to be reborn, like it had been waiting for me to take control all along. I knew there was still work to be done, still more to rebuild, but for the first time in my life, I didn't feel overwhelmed. I felt calm. I felt strong. In my pocket, my Medal of Honor rested against my thigh. It was the only thing that had truly felt like mine. I hadn't worn it in weeks, hadn't even thought about it since the trial. But today, as I stood there in the fading light, I pulled it out and held it in my hand, feeling the weight of it settle in my palm. It had never been about the medal. It had never been about the accolades or the recognition. It had always been about the fight to prove that I was worthy, that I could stand on my own, that I was more than just my family's expectations. The medal had come to represent everything I had been through, everything I had fought for. It was a symbol of strength, of perseverance, of a woman who had refused to be defined by anyone but herself. As I stood there, holding it in my hand, I made a decision. I wasn't going to wear it anymore. Not because I didn't value it, but because I didn't need it to validate me. I didn't need anyone's approval to know who I was. With a steady breath, I walked to the garden, finding a small stone memorial that had been built for my father. It wasn't much, a simple slab of granite, weathered and cracked, with his name etched into it. I placed the medal on top of the stone, letting it rest there for a moment before stepping back. "This is yours now," I whispered, "but it's my life to live." I turned and walked away, feeling lighter with each step. I didn't need the medal to define me anymore. I didn't need the house or the estate or anyone's approval. I had finally found peace, and that, I realized, was enough.